All right, what's going on, guys? First of all, just wow, I was very shocked by the amount of views and interest that the last video got. So I was a little bit unprepared for that. I did my best to go through all the comments and try and kind of filter out questions that were redundant. So if I don't answer your question directly in this video, probably because I felt like it was fairly close to another question that had already been asked. If you are still curious at the end of this video, of course, as always, you're welcome to leave comment. When I initially made the first video, I honestly really expected YouTube to kind of get 0 views. We did a podcast for a few years, and YouTube was always our smallest audience. So I'm kind of new to the whole YouTube game, working on maybe getting some graphics and things like that. Probably not in this video because I've been basically just trying to get questions downloaded and make this little background here. I followed a tutorial. I'll probably drop a link to that tutorial down in the description. But also, as many of you probably know, you're probably coming here from the video that inspired this. I didn't really link it in the last video because, again, didn't expect my YouTube audience to be very big. But I know that's kind of common manners here on YouTube, so I'll do that as well. There's a viral video, and this is actually kind of exploding this whole conversation about how people think, and I think that's awesome. Some of the comments mentioned that it would be helpful to have this kind of conversation, and I absolutely agree. I'm really happy to see so many people talking about things like this because I think mental health in general is a great topic to kind of tear down the stigma and talk about. Kind of something I've been writing about on Facebook a lot, but if the interest keeps up here and you guys want to hear more about any of the other mental kind of things that I talk about in this, feel free to ask. I'm all for tearing down that stigma and talking about mental health. So that's awesome. I'm happy to see this going on. Anyway, all right, let's just go ahead and jump into the questions. So had a lot of them. Like I said, I tried to filter some of them out if they were kind of redundant, and I'll try and touch on as many things as I can in this video. But if we don't get to all of it, I will most likely do another video. I'm definitely going to do another video for the Myers-Briggs personality test. That was kind of suggested, one of the first comments that came in, and absolutely will probably take that one. Not this video because it's probably already going to be getting long, but I may do just a whole separate video of me taking the Myers-Briggs personality test and see if that kind of correlates. I was also very happy to find out that I'm not alone, so that's awesome. There's a few of you guys out there who think like me. There's a few that think kind of more along the spectrum. There was that viral video that was talking with the girl who could not think in words. That's not necessarily my case, and it looks like there's definitely a spectrum of people and the way that they think. So let's just jump into this. How do you feel this would impact a romantic relationship with someone who thinks the opposite way? If you're having an argument or disagreement, are you listening to everything they're telling you about how they feel? No, and I kind of touched on that a little bit in the last video. So the analogy I use, I know it sounds terrible, but I don't mean it to be rude. I do this in my own mind to myself as well when I'm having conversations with myself, even though they're not really conversations. Yeah, if I'm having an argument or a disagreement, I'm not really listening to everything someone's saying about how they're feeling. I pick up a lot on visual cues. So the expression on their face, their body language, it's to some extent the words, but really more the way they say the words. And I can empathize fairly easily with them based on those things. And I haven't really found it necessary to listen to everything about how they're feeling unless I find myself really confused. Like if the body language isn't matching up, I'll often revert back to paying attention to words. So I can pay attention to everything they say. I just don't tend to do that. That's not how I automatically go into any conversation, really ever. That's more something that's there for like, okay, this isn't adding up. This doesn't make sense. Let me pay more attention to specific points of context in order to put together this puzzle. Actual effort. And to the first part of your question, a really good question, by the way. How do you feel this would impact a romantic relationship with someone who thinks the opposite way? So, I'm in a romantic relationship with someone who thinks the opposite way. My wife is a word thinker. We've come to discover after talking about things like this and after she watched the video. And it does make certain things difficult. So, she, and at some point, I'm guilty of not listening to the things she says to me. I think any husband or wife is the same way. You're with somebody long enough, you start to assume that you know them well enough, and you stop paying as much attention as you should to all the little details about things. So that's been an issue, and I think that somewhat correlates, or at least is made worse by my inability to at least automatically think in words. So with people I'm very comfortable with, close friends, my wife, things like that, I tend to pay less attention to the things they say than I would a stranger, because I kind of just assume I know them, and that's very presumptive of me, which is not a great thing. It's not a great quality. But then there are also things that, being in a relationship with a word thinker is frustrating for me as well, and those are a little bit harder to explain, I guess. But like when I say something, if we're having an argument and I'm saying that ultimately we need to have the dishes done by Wednesday of this week, and that's just a completely random example idea there. But if I'm saying we need to have the dishes done by Wednesday of this week, I'm not usually going to be as direct about that, because the idea in my head isn't formed with words, it's formed with the notion that those dishes need to be done, and it takes me a while to get to that logical point of actually saying the dishes need to be done by Wednesday of this week. So I'll say probably 5 or 6 other things that aren't as direct, and it will confuse her, frustrate her, and I'll be frustrated because I don't feel like my point is being made, or that she's not listening to my point entirely, which I guess, trying to imagine what a word thinker would think like, if you're putting the importance on each individual word that I'm saying, yeah, it's going to be very hard to understand exactly what point I'm making. You guys can tell here I'm a rambler. So yeah, it does impact romantic relationships, but it can also be great. There are times that I see things she doesn't expect me to see, or there are times that she understands situations more in depth than I possibly could have. So we complement each other as well as frustrate each other, and I think that's pretty much any relationship. Another point to that, talking about mental health issues, when I first started trying to go to therapy, when I first started trying to transition back to being a civilian and go into the VA to talk to doctors, or explain to family and friends what was going on with me, it was extremely difficult. My wife used to get on to me a lot before we had the conversation and realized how much differently I think than she does. But a lot of therapists, I think, are the same way. I imagine, if you're a therapist, let me know, do you think in words? Because I'm pretty sure you do. Everyone I've talked to has had an extremely hard time understanding what I'm saying. And that's not an intellectual failing on their part, that's a failing on my part. Like I said, my wife used to get on to me a lot because I talk around issues so much. She said, when you go in there, just tell them exactly what's happening. And that's extremely difficult for me to do, because exactly what's happening has so many things happening around it that I feel like if I don't describe every detail of the picture in my head, you're not going to clearly see the picture in my head. And that's really the best way I can describe that. It's probably not the best description, but we'll come back around to that. Okay. Do you talk in your daydreams? Not reading every word in a novel would take away from the experience of the eloquent writing that sets the mood. Yes, I can see that, that it might take away from the overall eloquence of the writing, and that may be something I'm missing. I'm not sure, because I don't tend to read. So looking back over all the books I've read, I don't, if you ask me for traits and qualities of a book, very rarely would I point out eloquent writing. It's just not something that I pay that much attention to. And at the same time, kind of counterintuitively, as a writer and as a comedian, I try to write eloquently, which I fail at a lot. Kind of works out for comedy, but not so much for writing, because I guess I really haven't paid that much attention to it. So that's interesting. That's something I'm kind of gonna have to go and pay more attention to in my own life and figure out. Do I talk in my daydreams? No, I don't talk in my daydreams frequently. If I need to, I guess, to fully paint the picture, I can. It's just not something that I do really that frequently. It's not an automatic thing that happens. As a matter of fact, I don't really remember ever having talked in my daydreams. So, but when I first read that question and I decided to try it, I was able to. So it's not impossible. It's just not something I do. All right. So next question. You touched on mental health. Someone like myself that has an internal monologue, and I'm in a dark mindset. I speak in my head and put myself down with the feelings of feeling sad and depressed. So that's a great question, and I hate to hear that the person who asked it is going through that. But yes, being someone that struggles with anxiety and depression as I'm going to call it a picture thinker. When I feel, so the way I would describe depression is really numbness. And for someone like myself, that's an inability to think, really. I get to the point where I don't want to get out of bed. I don't have any energy. I will often, so like 3D animation is something I'm trying to learn how to do, if you can see in the background of this video or in the last one. And, there are really basic steps to that, texturing an image or sequencing, keyframing, where the camera is supposed to be. As this zooms past me here, it's just a camera moving on a still object. Texturing that object and getting that look, those are fairly simple little things, and I can follow a tutorial and do them fairly easily, or something like this. Honestly, I followed a tutorial for the idea, but I could have thrown this or something similar to this together off the top of my head. But in a depressive state, when I'm having a particularly depressive day, my brain just won't function. So when I go to open up that thing, there just won't be any concept of what I'm going to do there. And if I try to force it and try to do something, that'll usually lead into anxiety. So that'll turn into, okay, say I attempt to texture that object, and we'll use the ball again. If you're 3D modeling, this ball is just going to be a gray blob with nothing on it. To put the texture on here, it's just literally a picture of this, and then you unwrap it and put that on the ball. It's a fairly simple process. But on a depressive day, I might try to do that, and because that image of how to unwrap that ball isn't there, I won't even know where to navigate to. Because I have to rely on words, and it's not something I usually do. It becomes extremely difficult for me to process information, for me to do small things. And then, like you said, you're talking to yourself and telling yourself you're a failure. I'm not really telling myself that. I don't really need to tell myself that. I feel that. So the moment that I realize I can't do this one basic thing, I have an overwhelming feeling of failure, stupidity, just a lot of really negative, what I call thoughts. But I mean, let's be honest, looking at just the comment section on this YouTube video, I'm not sure that the word thoughts is broad enough to cover, or is too broad, or not specific enough to cover what we mean. So when you say thoughts, if you mean that you're telling yourself, oh, I'm stupid, oh, I'm a failure in your head, no, I don't do that at all. But I just have overwhelming feelings, like I just failed at this thing. And it's not a word, it's a feeling of helplessness, I guess. Which again kind of relates back to, like I said in the last video, my recurring nightmares very much center around a feeling of helplessness. Like I've messed this thing up, I'll never be able to fix it, and it's just, this is existence now. Actually, that's a really great way to put it. My existence becomes depression, if that makes sense. My outlook, every idea that comes into my head on a day like that is tainted from the get-go by negativity. For anxiety, it's a kind of primal, fight or flight is really overused scenario for that, but it's a very primal, I feel like I'm in a fight physically. Like when I'm having panic attacks, it feels like I'm being attacked and I need to respond to that physically. And there's very little intellectual anything going on in a panic attack like that for me. So I don't know. Is that different from, most of you guys? I know specifically this person that asked the question that we seem to be very different on that front. So yeah, that's kind of how depression and anxiety impact me as a image thinker. When I ask you a question, let's say 25 times 8, how do you think to answer the question? What's going on in your head? So, pictures of the numbers are the way I've done it traditionally. 25 times 8, like I'm seeing that written on a piece of paper, but that's extremely slow. And when I was in the Navy, I actually started learning kind of different methods to deal with that because my job dealt really heavily with math and needed to be kind of more quick and to the punch. Luckily, we had great computer systems that did a lot of that math, but just in case, a lot of cartography and things like that. So I learned to assign kind of values and kind of shapes. I don't know that I would call them shapes. I know the person being interviewed in that one video was talking about shapes, and I get that. If I'm really in a hurry, I'll start imagining shapes, but I tend to just put values on things. So if you say 25 times 8, I literally picture, 8. Well, again, this is my favorite prop. 8 of these balls, and then 8 sets of 25s of these balls, and what that would look like, scale, like size wise. And that gives me like a general idea. Okay, I know it's not going to be 20 because if I had 25 of those balls, I've already got more than 20, right? I know it's not going to be, actually, it is 200. But it's kind of hard to translate how I view that. So it's literally like I arrange them in boxes. So it'd be a box of 25 of those, what that would look like, and then 8 versions of that, put them together, and it kind of gives me an overall idea of how much it's going to be. If I need a specific answer, I have to go, and I'm still learning how to do math. So if I needed the specific answer of 200 and I couldn't already just intuit that it is 200, I would have to write it down like you do in school. 25 times 8, move the numbers. It's extremely slow. I'm very thankful that I live in the age of computers because I would not be able to do math probably if I did. Question number 6. You said, do we repeat the words we read? Yeah. I mean, what is reading? And that's not me saying yeah. That's me reading the way I see him saying that. LOL, I'm confused on that one. Okay, so yeah, I don't know, man. Reading out loud, or woman, I guess, reading out loud and reading internally are two very different things for me. So when I'm reading that comment for you, I'm reading word for word because I'm quoting what you said. But when I'm picturing what I'm reading there, I'm kind of throwing out a lot of what you're saying, and I see the do we repeat? Yeah, going on in my head. Like I'm giving you a face and your facial expressions are doing that as I'm saying those words. That's reading for me. I don't read word for word, so I don't know. Hopefully that cleared it up. If not, ask a more specific question, I guess, or give me something to throw off of that, and I'll try and answer that a little bit better. I know I'm probably failing to answer that one, but a great example of hearing thoughts, for example, is the way Joe narrates in You on Netflix. Great show, by the way. His thoughts in the middle of situations are put into a narration, and that is almost exactly what it is like when we just automatically think audible words in our head. So, I'm really glad you brought up that show specifically because I was talking to a friend that likes that show, and I was talking about how unrealistic all these shows that put voices inside people's heads are, and he's like, what do you mean? That's how thinking works? And I said, no, that's not at all. So if that is what it's like, that's foreign to me. It seemed like a fabrication that Hollywood made up to be able to kind of voice what a character is thinking or feeling. But that's not at all how it works for me. So that has never happened ever for me. The way he talks to himself in that show doesn't happen at all. I can give voice to thoughts if I need to, but it doesn't happen the way he's doing it. I'm never like, when I open up Facebook and I'm going through social media, I'm never doing what he does in the show where it's like, okay, let's see who this person is. Let's talk about this or this or this. Let's analyze, I guess, with words. I am making lists, but it's just the pictures I'm seeing are going into my memory. And then if I need to think about those things later, I'll see those pictures again. And that's not a photographic memory. There is a difference there because, first of all, I don't have perfect memory. So sometimes I'll bring up what I saw and it's just totally wrong. And I also don't, I try my best to remember as much as possible, but I don't remember very well, especially with the depression and anxiety. My memory's gotten bad. So when I say I see that image, and if I need to remember it, I just bring that image up again. I don't want you to think I'm saying I have photographic memory. I just think in pictures. So that's how I tend to remember things and process things. So yeah, that's foreign to me. Good for you, though. If you have that, it seems like that would be a really nice way to be able to interact with your thoughts. I'm curious what empathy is like for you. For me, I hear what happened to someone else and then picture myself in their situation. Feel the emotion, and my internal monologue says, oh, that's so sad, this feels terrible. Do you just feel the emotion of whatever you think their experience is like? Yeah, that's actually a fairly good way to explain it. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the differences in depression and anxiety for a picture thinker versus a word thinker. If you tell me that your dog died, I'll remember how I felt when my dogs died, and then I'll kind of superimpose that feeling on what you must be feeling like. And then the more detail I get about your situation, the more I'll kind of revise that feeling based on how I think that would feel. So that's empathy for me. Hopefully that's a good explanation. I'm not sure. Ask more questions if not. All right. I want to know if you became numb or disconnected from your emotions due to your PTSD. Since I don't have an inner dialogue, I think with my feelings, my heart, my body, but something did traumatize me and I got robbed of my emotions. So it's really hard for me to know who I am right now because I'm really disconnected from my body. How do you feel about this? That is an excellent question. And honestly, I'm not sure. I only recently got diagnosed with PTSD. The events that happened that led to that were several years ago, and I've been learning and trying to figure out what's wrong with me for a long time. So I just got diagnosed. I definitely would say if you're having a hard time, therapy is awesome. If you're not in therapy, I always recommend that for anybody. Definitely just get help. Don't try to do it alone, because I did that for a few years and that can be extremely dangerous. Yeah, for being numb and losing my feelings because of PTSD, yeah. I didn't really, I had some forms of depression before the events that happened, but I had never felt as numb and emotionless as I did especially the last couple of years, which again are a few years removed from what actually happened, but it's just kind of processing and learning to handle these things. I do frequently when I get numb. That's actually when I'm at the most danger. I've noticed, I've had a couple of suicide attempts, and in every case that I've had a suicide attempt, it's been on a day where I was extremely numb. My brain wasn't working. I couldn't feel really anything, and I don't know how to explain that as a picture thinker versus a word thinker, because I guess as a word thinker that would be just not like if that voice just disappeared for you. Your ability to think just went away and was overridden with something that you're not really thinking, don't want to be thinking. I call that intrusive thoughts. I read in some of the comments that a word thinker's version of intrusive thoughts, or maybe just a slight difference. I'm sure it's the same in some regards, but I know one person in particular was talking about they have words that come into their head that they don't want there. So it's like that, but it's with a feeling, or the lack of a feeling, just not being able to feel. So some coping mechanisms I have for that are going to horror movies, or making sure that I go and hang out with a friend and get around a friend, because then the empathy thing that we talked about will kick in for me, and I can kind of feel vicariously through them until I can get back to myself. But if I find myself alone and I'm numb, it can become very dangerous very fast. But yeah, I would definitely recommend that if you're not in therapy, if you're not getting treatment, go get treatment, go into therapy, learn good coping mechanisms, because the ones that work for me aren't going to work for you necessarily. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. And me telling you what my coping mechanisms are is not advice or any kind of suggestion that you do what I'm doing. That's what works for me, is finding some way to either force myself to feel or feel vicariously with other people. So maybe that helps. Anyway. All right, next question. Do you ever have spaces between thoughts? Someone tried to explain a mindfulness exercise to me as focusing on the spaces between thoughts, and it just made no sense to me as my inner experience is a bunch of constant overlapping thought streams, not a sequence of discrete thought packets, so to speak. So I'm curious if the concept of spaces between thoughts makes sense to anyone else. Absolutely, it does, and that's something I kind of struggled with when I first got into Buddhism, and it sounds like your friend is either into Buddhism or into, you were talking about a mindfulness exercise. That's kind of the whole goal, at least, of Soto Zen Buddhism, which is the school that I follow. And yeah, I didn't really know they existed before, but the way that I understand it is through meditation or mindfulness exercises. For me, it's cooking. You just kind of let the mind go. You don't add energy. So what I started to notice at a certain point was, say I'm feeling angry. And for me, feeling angry is being angry. So it's not words, it's just energy. It's if I'm cooking and I'm angry, I'm going to do a worse job because I'm going to add too much or add too little. I'm not going to think about the taste. I'm going to be missing some part of it because part of my brain is on the anger, and whatever is making me angry is playing out in my mind. The mindfulness exercises that I learned dealing with gaps in thoughts like that teach you to just let that anger arise, let it pop into your head, okay, accept that it's there, and then don't feed it. Just don't, in my case, don't let that movie play. I'm angry about an ex-girlfriend. Okay, I'm angry about an ex-girlfriend. I could play that whole thing out in my head and find a reason why I'm angry about an ex-girlfriend, but would it matter? And then when you stop putting energy into those things, you'll start to notice at first very small gaps just in the arising of that energy. So you'll transition from anger to happiness, let's say, because maybe the food did turn out good and now I'm eating it and it tastes good and I'm happy. That's great, but if I spend a lot of energy trying to figure out why I'm happy about it, I'm just going to make it worse than it has to be. So I just don't give that energy, and then there's a gap that starts opening up. That's there's a whole religion based on that, so I'm not going to explain it very well in one video, but it's definitely something to look into. And yeah, I do, absolutely. I've seen gaps in my own thoughts, and those are extremely peaceful because yeah, sometimes it can be hard to have any silence going on up here. And by silence, and this is the other thing. Learning this is making me have to relearn the way I talk about things, because I've noticed a lot of vocabulary for expressing the way we think is based on the idea that people think in words. For someone who doesn't, when I say silence in my thoughts, that might sound like I mean literally no voice. I mean no static. So I have ADD as well. Was diagnosed with that when I was a child and given Adderall. And when I'm on Adderall, the way I describe how it impacts my brain is like there is a static buzz constantly going where I'm shifting. In one moment I'm thinking about doing dishes, and the way that I think about doing dishes is an image of dishes, feeling of dread. The next moment I'm thinking about fixing my Jeep, and I'm thinking about the feeling of oil on my hands and hurting my knuckles when I miss the wrench, or finding the size 10 wrench. That's static. And then when I take Adderall, it's like poop, and it's just one video, really clear resolution. Just that's what I'm doing. And yeah, so I don't do Adderall anymore because it has some other side effects that I don't like, and I don't like who I am when I'm taking that medication. But yeah, I definitely, I think that we need to work on our vocabulary for how we talk about how we think, so that it's not so focused on words. Because I'm learning now, especially, I'm definitely not alone here. There are a lot of people out there who think this way. So yeah, I think it's great that we're having this dialogue. Anyway, next question. I mostly think in words. However, when I'm very excited, I think in shapes. It's kind of weird to describe, but a shape comes in mind that to me perfectly represents my thoughts, but then I have to translate it to words so I can share my thoughts with another human. Also, very rarely, I feel as I think on a format I can't describe. It's not a shape, not a word. It's mostly like a composition of color, smell, and feeling. I would identify more with that last thing you said. I don't think in shapes very often. I can, but it's kind of the same thing as thinking in words. I can give something a shape, sharp or dull or round or square. But again, it's like thinking in words for me. It's something I have to consciously put my mind to doing on a regular everyday basis. I'm more like kind of what you said at the end there. I think in a composition of color, smell, feeling, and taste. One of the many jobs I've done over the course of my life has been a cook. I've worked my way up to running a couple of kitchens. I've been a sous chef in a decent Italian Greek restaurant, and the taste, like I just know it blows my wife's mind. She hates cooking because she hates following lists and doing those things. And I don't follow lists or do those things. Sometimes if I need to follow a recipe, I will, but in my head, it's very much a picture of what I want it to look like at the end and a picture of the taste. And I say picture of the taste, but it's not really an image, it's the actual flavor that I want it to have. So when I'm adding spice or when I'm cooking for a certain finish on a steak, a certain sear, then I'm doing that because I know how I want it to taste in the end. It's not a thought like I need to sear the steak. It's just I want it to have this at the end, so I'm going to do this right now because that'll make it do this at the end. There. Hopefully that answers it. Sorry. Okay. So, next question. I just cannot imagine being in silence all day long. So, like, if no one is talking to you and you don't hear your thoughts and your own voice in your head, is it just silent all day? Do you hear music? Yes, I love music. I hear music a lot in my head, just really not the vocals for that music. And then, no, it's almost never silent in my brain. That kind of goes back to the whole Buddhism thing. I practice, I meditate, I try to get more silence in my mind, but it's not silence. But it is, and that goes back to we need to change up our vocabulary for this kind of thing. Because, I never have anybody talking to me in my head. I'm not talking to myself in my head unless I'm trying to do one of those two things. But it's definitely not what I would call silence, because it's not peace, it's not an absence of thought. It's just a lot of feelings, a lot of imagined scenarios, a lot of kind of random thoughts. I mean, to me, they're just thoughts. So for a word thinker, the best way I could describe that is it would be physically describing a whole situation in your head and alternatives to that situation, and probably remembering like how something went down. For me, it's remembering how something went down by seeing facial expressions of the people I was talking to in the moment, seeing and feeling the way I felt as I said the things I said, because a lot of my conversation is based on I'll say something and those words are forming from an abstract idea in my head. They're just kind of coming until I feel like that's been described well enough. And then I'm watching the facial expression of the person I'm talking to and empathizing with the way that they're feeling to judge if what I'm saying is right or not. So that's kind of the more in-depth way that conversation works in my mind. Next question. But how do you form the words that are flowing out of your mouth if you're not thinking verbally? How do you structure what you're going to say? I actually kind of already answered that one on accident, but I think a general structure. So I know I want to get across the idea of answer his question. That's step one. Step two. His question is, how do I talk without thinking verbally? So the abstract idea in my head would be me talking. And this is kind of like an echo on a microphone. Like I'm thinking about how I think about when I talk without thinking about how I talk. I don't know. It's hard to explain. I'll have a general concept in my head that I want to describe, and to structure that into a sentence. And this is very automatic. It's not something I have to think about doing. It just happens without any verbal thought on my part. I start to talk, and those descriptors start to roll out in that structure that I know fits for the English language. And that's, again, what kind of made Spanish difficult for me, because that structure gets flipped, and I don't know which words to use when and where. So, maybe that answers it. I'm sorry, but how the frick Do you learn to speak as a child if you don't have an internal monologue? No idea, man. I don't know how anybody learns to speak, honestly. It blows my mind. All right, guys. Well, that is about all the time I have to do questions today. But as always, you're more than welcome to leave more comments, more questions. If I didn't answer something to your satisfaction, or you want me to be more detailed about something, feel free to ask that. Definitely, if this video gets as much response as the last one did, I will probably be doing another video next Friday. And probably sometime between now and next Friday, I'm going to go and take the Myers-Briggs personality test and throw that. See, that was something I had to remember specifically, and it took me a minute. I get tripped up over the specific words because I'm not thinking in words unless I have to make myself. So that's what that looks like for a picture thinker. Anyway, sometime this week, I will try and upload me taking the Myers-Briggs personality test and let you know the results on that. And if you guys would be interested in hearing any more about PTSD, depression, anxiety, attention deficit disorder, relationships with any of those issues from the perspective of a picture thinker, let me know. And yeah, thanks so much for everyone who subscribed. I'm really kind of blown away by the amount of people that have been watching and paying attention to this. So yeah, see you next time.